Hello, welcome back to the Arturia Pigments 3 tutorial series. Another preset deep dive for you today. We're going to dissect Cave of Swallows. Just before we set off, if you want to help support me and my channel, please check out the Patreon link below. That's the best way to do it. Let's hear the sound before we do anything. Lovely, expressive, semi-evolving pad kind of sound. And today we're going to approach it from a slightly different perspective. I'm going to take all of the effects out without even worrying about them. There's no sequencer. And I'm going to turn engine 2 off. And we're going to start from the ground up. We'll just look at engine 1, put that together again, and so on and so on. So this is the harmonic additive synthesizer all on its own. Let's have a look what settings we've got to modulate this thing. We've got some aftertouch on this synth. Now obviously aftertouch requires you to have an aftertouch synthesizer. Most people do these days. Most MIDI keyboards come with it. But basically it's a zone inside the key. So you press the key down and then press it deeper and you can see the aftertouch being engaged. There it is, coming in. So that's me pressing deeper into the key. And you can see we've got filter modulation. So it's modulated the cutoff positively. And we've also got, this is the harmonic engine 1 frequency modulation. And we've got exactly the same kind of modulations being applied via the modulation wheel as well. So these are small incremental gains, add them both together for a cumulative effect. So this is me turning the modulation wheel up now. You can see it visually on the screen. Doing exactly the same job as the aftertouch. So in this preset, the poor old filter cutoff is under assault from all sorts of angles. We've got envelope 2 applying more cutoff change to it. Now don't forget envelopes, if their gate source is driving off your keyboard, they're only going to respond once per note. This isn't a repeating thing. So every time I press a note, the sound gets brighter, then duller, and then settles down to a constant state of dullness. That doesn't stop me from then introducing additional modulation wheel or aftertouch variants. So we've got 3 different ways to modulate the filter, but this is happening every time I press a note. The next modulation source that we've got that affects engine 1 is LFO2. So let's have a look at the LFOs. So we've got this very fast ramp. Now can you see that the reset source is set to sequence clock? It's a little bit misleading. There isn't a sequencer in use in this preset, so it basically means there is no reset source. If I turned the sequencer on, well, I'll just press a note first and then turn this on, you can hear that the sequencer is resetting the LFO. But if it's disengaged, it's not doing it. So it's basically like it's free running. Other than that, it's a very straightforward LFO, just on a constant ramp. And it's doing 2 different jobs. The first one is controlling the pitch of engine 1. Very, very subtly. There's not subtle. Turn that down again. And we're also controlling filter 1 volume. Now, when it comes to the filters for this thing, we're not looking at engine 2 at the moment, but it's worth mentioning that engine 1 is going through filter 1 and off to FX bank A. Engine 2, when we get to look at it, is going into filter 2, which then goes into filter bank B and off to the output. So we do have 2 engines being completely split, sent through different filter units and different FX bank units. We're not worrying about any of that just yet, but it's worth bearing in mind. So here we are going through the filter 1 volume, and this is effectively a master volume for this engine. Now you're not hearing very much volume change at the moment because it's controlled from a sidechain. Macro 2 has control of this modulation. So if I turn modulation 2 up, you'll hear that volume. If I slow this down, you'll really hear it. And if I turn this to maximum, then we've got the absolute limit of that control. Turn macro 2 down, and it's no longer having any effect again. Made quite a few changes to the sound then. I'm just going to get back to my basic preset. And turn engine 2 off again. That's just a top tip for preset deconstructs. Make yourself milestones or waypoints in the deconstruction of the sound, so that if you change too many things and you completely break the sound, you've got a previous camp, like a, you know, camp 3 up the mountain that you can go back to and carry on from there. Moving on, we've got something in envelope 3. Let's have a look at this. Couple of things. Envelope 3 attack. So we've got a little bit of a breadcrumb trail here that we have to follow. So the LFO is controlling envelope 3 attack. Envelope 3 is this control here, and that's set to engine 2, so we'll come back to that. Let's just stop right there. The other effect this LFO is having is on the harmonic engine, so we're now interested again. Cluster density. Let's have a play with that. Almost kind of like a static interference kind of thing. Bubbling and gurgling and doing all sorts of cool stuff. Now LFO 3 is absolutely crazy fast, and you can see that there's this weird effect on the interface. Now can you see, as I turn the knob, the waveform knob, if I go all the way up to maximum, it's sample and hold. That's why the dots are jumping all over the place. It's effectively a random pattern. And if I pull it down into square mode, it follows the square curve accurately. So it can't represent a sample and hold, so it doesn't try. That's what you get in there. But it's really, really fast. If I slow this sync down dramatically, you get to hear more accurately what's going on. I know I've messed with a load of the controls, but it's easy to hear what's going on. And then when we speed it up, that turns into the chatter. Okay, let's get back to our preset again. Next, run 2, what's going on over here? Envelope 3 we've already seen is only of interest to engine 2, so we'll get back there later. Random 3 rate. It's not immediately obvious what random 3 is doing, but this little purple dot on the envelope tab is your clue. If we hop over to the envelope tab, random 3 is the gate source to this envelope that we're still not interested in, so we're going to stoically ignore. We'll come back to all of this when we look at engine 2. Macro 1 is controlling the FM, the frequency modulation. We've already seen that macro 2 is controlling the filter 1 volume via a sidechain. Macro 3 is all about engine 2, and macro 4 is worried about effects. So that's basically it for engine 1. Let's reload our preset, turn engine 1 off, and now engine 2 on. This is an analog engine. Let's hear what this is doing. Called Cave of Swallows, but it sounds more like frogs to me. It's a strange sound effect on its own. It doesn't really, you know, you're thinking what's your place in the sound, but when you bring the engine back in, the engine 1 back in, it's an excellent little articulation on the sound. It reminds me of Waiting for Cousteau by Jarre. Lots of little kind of tinkling things in the background. So let's figure out how we're getting that weird sound effect. Engine 2 is only actually using one of its 3 oscillators. Oscillators 2 and 3 both have their volume turned down. And so we can really home in on oscillator 1 to try to figure out what's happening. Well, a lot of this distortion is coming from the frequency modulation, so I'm going to turn that off first. Okay, It's a slightly more recognizable sound. There's still crazy stuff going on. It's really, really quiet. Turn it up a little bit. We can see that the volume control is being wildly modulated. So I think we probably need to figure out what the modulation routings are before we can make sense of where that oscillating sound's coming from. Well, the first modulation control that we came across that was having anything to do with engine 2 is envelope 3. And this turns out to be the centerpiece of how this sound is constructed. So let's have a look at this envelope and see what's happening. First of all, we've got really fast attack, really fast decay. So whatever it's doing, you can see it's doing these really fast, sharp pulses. That's mapped maximally to our oscillator's volume control. So when this envelope triggers and hits its attack point, the volume is being turned fully up. If I manually turn the volume all the way up, we actually hear the tone, which is just a really simple sine wave. So all of that effect is coming from these tiny staccato stabs of sound. This volume control is in turn being sidechained from macro 3. So this is the master knob by which we determine how much this envelope is allowed to affect the volume of the oscillator. If I turn that knob all the way down, you're not going to hear it because this modulation is never being applied, and so the volume is always at 0. If I turn this fully up, it doesn't mean you're hearing the sound all the time. It means the envelope is acting at its maximum, doing this as much as it possibly can. Now, where are these sharp pulses coming from? Well, we saw earlier that random 3 had something to do with this envelope. Random 3 is a free-running binary oscillator, so it's just constantly spamming backwards and forwards, zeros and ones with this crazy shape. And so this is the thing that's determining when the envelope fires. Ordinarily, we're used to keyboards triggering envelopes. You press a keyboard, you hear a sound. Well, that's not the case here. This random generator is what's actually triggering the envelope and what's allowing us to hear these pulses of sound. But if you felt at all sorry for filter 1's cutoff being attacked from 3 different angles earlier, that's nothing compared to poor old envelope 3, because it's also beleaguered by the LFO. So LFO 3, which has this crazy shape that we saw earlier, is controlling the attack speed of this envelope. So sometimes we're going to get to maximum volume really quickly, and sometimes it's going to be much slower depending on what state the LFO is in at the time. If I drag this out, hopefully you should see it more. There you go. Every now and again you're seeing a really slow one, but for the most part it's very, very fast. LFO 3 is doing a crazy thing, so it's not very often that we get a dramatic period of slow attack. And so if I turn that attack up long enough, well, basically I'm holding the key down at the moment. You can't see it on the keyboard, but I'm holding my C down. And we're almost never hearing the sound because all of the action is going on at this tiny pulse. When I bring the attack speed back in, then it's firing more often. And we're still not done because random 2 is operating on the opposite side of the envelope. So this is controlling envelope 3's decay curve. Exactly the same principle. This is determining how fast or slowly the envelope is allowed to decay. Random 2 is a sample and hold, which is yet another random signal generator. So drag this out to make it more obvious what's going on. If I take the attack completely out of the equation, then we'll see the decay operating more regularly, more often. And whatever signal random 2 is generating is informing the speed of the decay. And one final modulation effect on this envelope. I promise this is the last one. This is completely insane. What I'm going to do is get us back to our basic preset because I've changed too many things there. So this is the standard envelope. Remember random 3, which is controlling how often the envelope triggers. Well, random 3 is modulated by random 2. I kid you not. So the speed at which random 3 determines whether or not to be up or down is constantly being controlled or affected by random 2. So good luck figuring out any sense in envelope 3. This thing is as random gets, and all of that feeds in to the sound that we're hearing. like completely. Every now and again you'll get a rapid burst, and then you'll get a single hit, and then silence for a while. All of that is coming from these ridiculous number of modulations being applied to this envelope. Remember also that we took frequency modulation out of the equation. That's what's distorting the wave. If I turn FM off, you get a simple sine wave. The crazy shape is coming from the frequency modulation. Frequency modulation itself is a combination of both sine wave and noise. It's not just the oscillator on its own. So let's have a play with this. Go all the way to noise. Get a much more noise-laden sound. I'm hearing real fuzz there. And in pure oscillator 3 mode, we get the more chirpy effect. And we've got a combination of those two. And those little kind of pings, and you get the lovely kind of echo effect. Reload the bass sound again. That sound is feeding into filter 2, which is a bandpass filter. You get to control which section of frequencies you're hearing with the bandpass filter. And then finally, we can bring both engines back together again. There's our sound. And then we can have a look at the effects. So remember, FX Bank A is only dealing on the pad sound. So I'll actually turn engine 2 back off again so that we can hear these. Let's turn them on one at a time. There's the delay. Chorus and reverb. All very straightforward stuff. Bank B. So we've got analog into filter 2 into FX Bank 2, which sounds like this. So here's just the pan on its own. Oh, that was a left, that was a right, that was a left. So there's your stereo pan operating. Oh, I should have mentioned actually with FXA, both of these delays are pitch shifted delays. So you always get the original tone, and then the delayed sounds are pitch modulated. Oh, there's a high one. And reverb, doing what reverb does. Finally, the auxiliary send, which is obviously applying to both sounds, has delay, chorus and reverb. That's all very straightforward. And this is where macro 4 comes in, because the send level is controlled from this knob. Turn it down. This is just, you're hearing there the delays and reverbs off the internal engine effects. And then we bring the auxiliary back in for the extra layer of all of these effects being applied over the entire sound. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks a lot for watching.